Hello, everybody. Good morning. That was really loud. Sorry. Welcome to this panel on institutional interventions and transformations. Woo! My name is Nivi Christensen, and I'm the director of Nuuk Art Museum. I have the pleasure to moderate this panel today, and I'm so thrilled to be here with so many inspiring people, with so much power, and you've been, I've known some of your work along the way, and I'm still really inspired by the way that you make things happen all the way. I'm reluctant to not call it transformation, but we'll get back to that later. But I'm really inspired by the way that you step by step make things happen. But I would like you to introduce yourself. Reneltta, will you start?
Oh, yeah.
Please speak into the microphone so we get it into the recording as well.
Yes. Ublumi Uvanga Atira Reneltta Arluk. So good morning. My name is Reneltta Arluk, and I come originally from the Northwest Territories. My mother's Dena Suslana and Cree from Treaty 8 Territory, Wood Buffalo region, and my father is Inuvialuk Gwitchin from the Inuvik region. And I think we'll dig into a lot of stuff, but I've been primarily in performing arts for about 20 years professionally. I founded a theater company called Avingaq Theater, which was a name given to me by my great-grandmother, my dad's grandmother. And Avingaq is, of course, the cloudberry. And so I founded a theater company to use like an umbrella to help create space and foster growth and stories through theater in the North. And then I became, so I'm a producer, and then I was a writer, and then an actor, and then a playwright, then a director, and then I joined the arts. So then I became a director of Indigenous Arts at BAM Center, and I've worked in major theaters across Canada, the National Arts Centre, Stratford Festival, and now I'm at the National Gallery of Canada under Indigenous Ways in Decolonization as a senior manager for policy protocols and strategic initiatives, which overall is governance. That's me.
Hello and good morning. My name is Emily Laurent Henderson, and I still don't have a good way of describing myself because I used to just say, I'm Greenlandic and white or Qabruna, but then I also try to honor somebody told me, make sure you honor all your grandmothers. So that felt too simple. So on my father's side, I'm a Greenlander, but I'm the first of his children born here in Canada. And on my mother's side, I am Scottish and English, and they've been in Canada for a few generations. I am the Associate Curator of Indigenous Art and Culture at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection in Kleinburg, which is a village in Vaughan, which is just north of Toronto. And I'm excited about this conversation because we're such a, in some ways, inaccessible institution. I'm very interested in access. I've been there for about a year now. My work the project I'm currently working on right now, I've curated a show and I'm producing a publication. Some of the associated authors with this publication are in the room, that explores a collection of 90,000 works on paper that we have on site from the Qinnirajaattuq Drawings Archive. And we don't have that formally accessioned. That's not part of our collection. That is, actually it still belongs to West Baffin Cooperative, and we hold it in trust. I'll tell a bit more of that story down the line. Prior to that, I was on the Indigenous and Canadian curatorial team with the Art Gallery of Ontario. I have worked with the Inuit Art Foundation and the Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver. So that's sort of my institutional background there.
My name is Dine Arnannguaq from Lynge. I am Galalak from Galalak, born and raised in Qinnirajaattuq, south part of Greenland. Age of 15, I moved with my mother, who is an artist, to Sápmi, where I have been living since. I'm the director of Daitadallo Sami Artist Network. Have been that in 7 years now. The first actually worker and administrative, the Daitadallo, which is a place for art, an artist in Sami language. So I kind of represent two indigenous kind of backgrounds, which is very helpful for the institution development I have been doing the past years in collaboration and many of you guys too, which is really crucially effective in this kind of transformation. We have 23 interdisciplinary artists within our network, professionals, artists, which is also very kind of different situated, that we also one of the biggest artist network in the Europe. It's definitely one of the largest in indigenous network developing, so this is very interesting to be here. So we're going to, you can read a bit more about the background I have here, but either way we can dive into the methods we do and develop. Wait.
Good morning. My name is Isabelle Avingaq Choquette. My mother is from Igloolik, Nunavut, and my dad is a white French settler in Montreal. I'm co-curator at Avingaq Cultural Institute, which is the Cultural Institute of Nunavik. I care for collections here in Montreal. We have our head offices in Inuit, but our administrative offices are here in Montreal with archives and collections. And I studied applied museum techniques at the Montmorency College in Laval. And I worked for Avingaq as a museum technician for maybe 4 years. And I'm now co-curator for maybe a little less under a year.
Thank you. Isabelle, would you start then? Now we've started from the other way around. We've talked about, we're going to dig into something about the institutional experiences and expertise and how you've been digging into it as you're experts in each of your field. And I think that's really, to me, really important to acknowledge, because whenever we work within some of these really structural institutions, we often become the small ones, the big, the small, unacknowledged ones. There are experts in so many different fields with so many different long educations in different ways, but you're experts in each of your field. And I would like to hear your expert opinions on how you've been going along with these transformations, how you've been digging into these issues around wanting change, or actually also the other way around, people expecting change from you as Indigenous people. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
I would say that I'm not necessarily an expert, but I'm good in preventive conservation in collections. And the second part was, the second part of the question was?
Could you share some experiences on the way that you've been working with this, wanting to transform, or some change, or something that has created change in the institutions that you work in?
Maybe I would start by saying that the collections here in Montreal maybe weren't always as welcoming to Inuit, and that was probably one of the first things that I wanted to change in my work, is to have these collections accessible and especially welcoming to Inuit, to the people that these belongings belong to. So in a way, at first the collections were accessible, but maybe there was barriers of how the collections were seen or how we were representing Inuit. Now it's more of welcoming and letting people visit the collections naturally, organically, yeah.
Could you elaborate a little on that? What did you make? What kind of change did you make to make that feeling?
The feeling is more, how it was when I first started working, I was given a paper saying, this is the visit, this is the tour you're going to give to the visitors. And I did that tour a couple of times, and I was feeling often uncomfortable as like I'm showing people their own stuff. Like, so the way it's changed, I think, is we're all touring and seeing these amazing belongings, amazing stuff, and learning from our visitors also in that way.
Reneltta, could you elaborate a little on that? Because you've done a lot of the same kind of work in microphone issues.
That's all good. Elaborate on
how you've been trying to angle the same kind of change to be more inviting, inclusive, or...
Yeah. When I founded Avingaq Theatre, I'm sorry, I answered the assignment and sent slides in. So I'm very sorry that you're just going to see 4 versions of me on that. And they're only meant to be talking points, and they're not like glorifying. I'm happy to talk about the conflicts of these things too. I think it's important when institutions blast your face as the face. I think that is something to talk about, which is why I put up the BAM Center one. Not just like BAM Center, but definitely I'm still on their website. I got that off of there like before I came in. When we talk about like, I founded Avingaq Theatre as an umbrella organization to invite mentorship, encouragement, and Northern stories. And it was always like, I was an actor with a one-woman show, 100%, and Avingaq Theatre produced it. But the next production we did was I Count Myself Among Them, which was a radio play that I co-produced with Travis Mercury. And it was like we invited voices from across the communities, and we got no money for it because I just was starting out, and we paid them. So one thing I always do is I always make sure we pay everybody. That's a big thing. I don't know what's going on here. So we pay everybody, and then and I just often make space to hear if there's any concerns or questions or things that they need. I always feed everybody. Like Avingaq Theatre's fed everybody since the beginning. Because you can't nurture growth without food and water and coffee. And lessening the barriers, I used to pay cash. I used to just give everyone cash, and then they said, can you stop giving us cash? Because it's dangerous to walk around with it. And I went, no problem, I'll e-transfer you now. And so I kind of just like very practically created space for art. And then when I started working in institutions, I recognized that those are things that they did not do. They did not pay you right away. They didn't feed you. They didn't have space for you in your to bring forward conversations unless it was dictated in the agenda. And I just went, this is really not a space that's safe. And so really primarily the whole focus of what I do is to create a space, cultural safety. And so that means I'm also, because I think I have a theater training background, like I started in storytelling, but then I got a degree in a BFA acting degree at University of Alberta. And theater is conflict, and we're drama conflict driven. That's how we create art, is through conflict. So I'm actually not afraid of conflict, which I know is like a very thing, because Inuit don't do conflict. I love it. So if you want to talk to me about anything that I disagree with, I'm happy for it. I won't take it personally. I won't attack you. I will definitely want to hear what you have to say, and then I would definitely be able to say what I want to say. And so I think by allowing a room to be okay to have disagreements, I'm happy to talk through that and find solutions. And so by having a space like that, I think I can do. So when I do my practice, I control that a little bit easier, and I make a bigger space for it. In institutions, it's harder because then you have their systems. And their systems are structured in ways that suppress conflict. So then it boils and it gets crunchy. And then they evade solution through their policies. And then there's not a responsibility to community that continues. So institutions interact with communities when it serves them. But when they create the conflict and leave, we are actually, because we're associated to these institutions, we're left with the ashes, right? We're left with the aftermath, and that's where, we were talking about lateral violence just briefly, but it's like that's where how do you navigate institutional violence through community? And that's like, it's hard to resolve it, and I don't think we have an answer, but the transformational change is I just allow myself to take responsibility, and I sometimes take responsibility for things that I didn't do, because I think it's important to do reparation. And I have big shoulders that lets me to do that, and I just navigate the best that I can. I listen, and I just support. And I recognize that it's not about me, it's the service. I provide, I'm for community, always 110%.
Arnannguaq, Dine, you've done a ton of work in relation to community building in Guartugeno. Could you speak a little bit about that kind of community building you've been doing?
Yeah, first to understand a bit about the community I actually live in Guartugeno, we are the majority. The Sami people is the majority in its own city. And often the transformation don't happen in our spaces, it happens in other institutions, So that's also very important to talk about, because the transformation is not on us, it's on the opposite side, So in the community building, I have really like the sort of, I've been growing up in Greenland, where the islands is between. We don't have the connections between the islands. And so how the arts institution and how the indigenous people have been building up communities, it's the way I'm building up the institution, Interdisciplinary, it's indigenousness, It's not just one field. That's a very Western way to think disciplinary on, So that's the first point of our institution development is interdisciplinary, because often artists, our artists, professional artists, it's a lot. It's not only one discipline, they can a lot. And that's why also they make them very interesting and very professional, because they can a lot of things in the same time. And often it's not that understandable for the opposite side, That's often the question is, why is Sami art or indigenous art so popular right now? And it's not only the popular bit because it's really good. They are so professional, productive, because they can a lot of things in the same time when they produce arts. So that's the first point. And for us, for me in an institution, it's almost like a dream job because I'm developing the voices of the artists. So the artists, I just almost follow the artists, but also the community building is taking up space like society problems. I often make programs where we're taking up themes, which is very necessary for our communities. I did a lot of big programs where we have been talking about Me Too campaign in indigenous way, where it's only for our communities. Like I invite not only artists but also the healthcare, indigenous healthcare, and then I also invite other like politicians. So also this is in a disciplinary way to talk about problems or themes. And that has been quite successful for the community we have been working on. It's not only the Sami, but also the circumpolar communities. Like our network has been developing on this kind of methods. So the often thing is that the Sapmi 2 was great, because we could measure also the knowledge in the community about this theme. Did we have enough knowledge within the healthcare system? And then the arts. Through arts, the people can understand it. And also we can then measure it, what is needed for the community to build up on. It's not only the arts, but the arts speak, art as a tool. That is the biggest thing I really like. Transform, using art as a tool to transform the other side, And knowledge gap, in Norway it's really, because yesterday we talked a bit about that we have the Truth and Reconciliation report last year, and it's crucifying. And it's still going on, very colonial structures within the the Western society in Norway, because we are really like forced into our own communities. We are for Samis, like it's South Samis, which is almost lost the totally language, and there are very few artists who has bringing up the language, actually using the arts, music, theater, building up the culture. So it's so important to try to navigate this. But the biggest changes an institution we do, it's on the opposite side. So I'm also doing the work where I go to the national museums, or we have a lot of requests for the artists, but then also we can like navigate them, not go through the artists, so they don't have to stand upon this big institution. Because there is lack of resources when a small indigenous society works with big institutions. It's like they come 20 person, like you are one person working with all things, and there are 20 person, and you have to try to. It's crazy system, you know. It's a crazy system, and that's not upon us, and that's why the Truth and Reconciliation answer was. The government of Norway said, oh, now the cultural field is going to, they already do a lot, and then they're going to do a lot more now. And it's like, suddenly we are also responsible for this. But my answer is, okay, building up institutions. Give us money, give us resources, give us time, and then we can go back to you and giving you the answers you actually want. And the Norway situation is also that after the report, suddenly the national institution gets money for the Sami to bring the Samis in while we are the export. It's like, so I'm really glad we have the collaboration with Canada, because you've gone through this. And it has been in 2022 when I was in Arctic Art Summit, it was mind-blowing because I was so exhausted. But it gave me a lot of energy and new things to work, because then we have this link. And I don't know, even talk about Kardashian, because then it's like this. Canada is 7 years ahead of us in the work of Truth and Reconciliation. 7 years. And then we are in this between, and then we have Greenland, which is way back again. And that's in its own country, you know. So we have this, yes. I don't know where to go, but I hope it makes sense how we work institutional, but also how collaboration between is crucifying important.
Yeah. Emily, you have some dreams on making it more inclusive.
Yeah, so I feel like I can't talk about my work without maybe sort of laying down the foundations of the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, because it is a very... it's an interesting place. It is, so a little bit of backgrounder, McMichael Canadian Art Collection. It's a collection of about, we've got 6,000 or 7,000 works in the permanent collection. A third of that is Indigenous. I do work, I would say, in this moment and in my career, my niche and my, again, I don't like using the word expertise or specialization, but it is Inuit art. That's where my heart is. My dad was an Inuit artist. This is what I was raised in and what's become such a part of my work, but I do work with Indigenous artists across what we now know as Canada. And that is one thing. We have a unique mandate at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection where we collect only works from Canadian artists. And so we've had some, we're starting to push back on that a little bit, because there are works, if you think about Alaskan artists or artists from places like maybe Akwesasne, who there's like a Eva Mendes quote or something. It's just like, I didn't cross the border crossed me, right? So it's just like people that have there have been lines that have been drawn through territories, and it's maybe not necessarily fair or ethical to exclude those artists. So the collection itself was started by this couple who lived in Kleinburg. When it's now sort of like a suburb of Toronto, but back in the day it was sort of its own village and community. A beautiful estate, many acres. I don't know exactly how many. The grounds are gorgeous, but it was a private estate owned by collectors, and so many institutions start out this way, like I used to see vestiges of that when I was at the AGO, because there's still on the grounds of the Art Gallery of Ontario is the house that had been donated to the city, and then the gallery built around it. So a lot of arts institutions do have their roots in private collections, and there's lots of research that can be done to sort of, it can be very problematic. But Robert and Signe McMichael, they were particularly interested in a group of seven, so a lot of people associate us as being the group of seven gallery, and to the point where like there are members of the group of seven literally buried on site, which is, yeah. That's another conversation to unpack. That, and then they were particularly interested in Inuit art and Northwest Coast art, and that was all that they were interested in from an Indigenous art perspective. To the point where so I'm the first Indigenous curator they've had in 30 years. So there was a long gap between myself and Lynne Hill. And so Lynne Hill was making a lot of really important, she's a curator from Six Nations. She was making a lot of important acquisitions, and the curatorial team at the time in the 90s was also making other significant acquisitions of contemporary art. And this kind of went against the original owners of this work's intent, where they want a group of seven, Northwest Coast masks, and Inuit art and prints. And suddenly this collection started to grow and expand in ways that they were not happy with. So even though they'd already donated it to the province of Ontario, they sued for control back and won. And this is in the late 90s. And when they got control back, Indigenous art was no longer included in the mandate. And so that was another long fight through the late 90s and early 2000s to have Indigenous art included back in the mandate. So that is the context of where I'm working with. And I'm currently the only Indigenous staff member at my institution, although this is due to change. So I almost feel like we're all coming to this conversation about transformational institutional change from different points in both our own careers and journeys, and also in the points and careers of our institutions. And I came out of the AGO in October of last year, which, like, I'm sure you all have context for that moment in time. And so then to come out of the AGO and then to come into a place where it's like, okay, I'm the only Indigenous staff member on this team that hasn't had an Indigenous staff member in 30 years. Like, in retrospect, it's like, what a wacky thing for me to do and like sign up for. And like right off the bat, right, there's the first things to start to notice is about the lack of access. And right now, like, it's very, very hard to get to the McMichael. There's not good public transit out there. You basically need to have a car, or you need to take a very expensive Uber ride. This is a problem that we're constantly sort of contending with, and this is like something that we're working on in terms of addressing that. It's just like, okay, well, we are dealing with the city of Vaughan, because the city of Vaughan is the fastest growing city in Canada right now. So it's just the fact that we don't have like a good public transit system out to what they continually call the cultural jewel of the city is also crazy to me. But I will say, like, and this is not something I will take any credit for, because this is work that was started to happen like actually before I was born. I was alluding a bit to the fact that we have these 90,000 works of Inuit prints, and not their prints, their drawings, 90,000 drawings, 90,000 works on paper that are. They belong still to Quebec, but they're holding in collections. And I see Jessica Kutchuk, who also was working with this collection in the very early days of digitization in the mid-2010s. So that work came to us in 1990, and that was orchestrated by Quebec. There's all this kind of mythos around why they chose McMichael, or why they chose to send it south at all. And the story always goes is that there had been a fire at another co-op, and people got scared and they wanted to send it to a vault. I've since heard things that sort of refute that. There's not a lot of written history about why it really came to us, but the point was is that it did. And originally the idea was to accession that work, and there was a lot of work done in the early 2010s to think about, like, okay, how do we make this a permanent part of the collection? But we've since decided, like, this is still Quebec's holdings. We're just kind of keeping it safe until such time, if and when they choose that it's going to go back to the community of Qinnit. And one of the terms in the agreement was that work, because it was leaving the community, it was going to need to be accessible in another way. And so the agreement was that everything would be digitized and made freely, publicly available. We're talking about 90,000 works in paper, and we're talking about the 1990s, right? So the technology at the time, and even just the bandwidth to hold something like a collection of 90,000 works on paper, basically didn't exist. That work began throughout the 2010s, but was not completed until December of last year. And that came to us, there was, so that's like more than 30 years after that work was accessioned. And so there is a lot of like, oh, why did it take so long? And those are fair questions, because that people need access to that work. It's such a trove of knowledge. And sometimes it's just like, well, we were also waiting on technology to develop, I feel. And so there was machinery that was developed actually by Edward Burtynsky, the photographer, that could do the work of could digitize 1,000 works in a day. So 90,000 works, the remaining, I think there was 85,000 works left to digitize, and that was done in 6 months, which anyone who works in collections knows that's virtually unheard of. And it is now freely and publicly available online on the McMichael website in both high and low bandwidth. And so that is allowing unprecedented community access, and but also curatorial access, because I've been able to review those works over the past year and produce a 215 work show much more quickly. I made all my selections within the span of about 9 months, where that would have taken me years to review that work. But yeah, so that's where some of the access is coming in now. But there's still so much work to be done to be able to physically, because that's just works on paper. But we still have so many things that I personally think that maybe we shouldn't have, or things that still should be accessible in a in-person way, that we're still in the very, very, very early days of developing.
Isabelle, you mentioned this thing about not wanting to present the others' stuff or other people's things. And I was just wondering, Emily, whether there is an acknowledgement of that within your institution, that not wanting to represent somebody else or to present somebody else. Is there an actual want to change that within your institution? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm the first full-time Indigenous staff member in a very long time, but I also have a bit of a precursor is the wrong word. Someone who came before me in very recent times. Predecessor, thank you so much, predecessor. My predecessor, I would say, is Bonnie Devine, who I'm sure some of you may know, who is a brilliant Anishinaabe scholar and artist, who was not working in an employment capacity with the McMichael, but was a longtime collaborator and contractor, and I think the McMichael really wanted her to be their Indigenous curator, but she's worked in institutions for a long time and is no, I want my freedom, which fair enough. So Bonnie, because, as I was saying, I do work with Inuit art and cultural belongings, but also I'm responsible to so many other peoples. Where we're situated, we're 3 minutes north of what at one point had been Wendat village. And now Wendat people were living in what is now, the lands that we're on are covered by the Mississauga Purchase, so they're in treaty with Mississaugas of the Credit. But prior to that purchase, it had been Wendat territory, and Wendat have since been pushed up the St. Lawrence River and are now living sort of in Quebec area, Quebec City especially. And so Bonnie was the one that took the initiative that started building relationships with Wendake and with Wendat artists. And she did really important and insightful relationship building, especially when there were artifacts, belongings that had been found very, very, very close to our site. And they were clay pipes, and for the clay pipes are very, very sacred in Haudenosaunee culture. So then there was consultation then about what do you want us to do with these, and then we were given very specific instructions about how they should be displayed and how they should be handled. And so my hope is to be following in some of those relationships that have already been built, and then starting to build some more of my own, or building pre-existing relationships that I have, of course, with Inuit. We don't have too many, I would say, historic belongings of Inuit in our collection, but we do certainly, especially from the Northwest Coast. I don't know if that answered the question.
It was just, Reneltta, you have experience of both institutions willing to change and not willing to change. Yeah. Could you speak into those issues around that and what makes that
crash?
I think, problems. We want to talk about crash, right? No, but I know that there is many in the audience also working institutions that some of your institutions might be willing to change and some of them might not be. So could you share some insights on some references, some insights on how to deal with that dual, whether you're in an institution that wants to change? We can all agree that all of the institutions should change. Dakalik Patridge said a perfect storm the other day. How do you create that perfect storm? And is the institution ready for the perfect storm? Would that demand a different way of acting?
Yeah, that's really great. I think institutions actually want to change because they have to. Not because they want to, because they have to. And because they have to, they don't know exactly how to do that. And so I'll use the BAM Center I'm not going to slag anything. I'm just going to talk facts. So in 2016, BAM Center hosted a Truth and Reconciliation Summit, and that inspired the organization to think about how they engage Indigenous arts leadership at the institution. So in the late 1980s, the Indigenous arts became a part of the BAM Center, but it was sessional. So it would be someone who come in half the year and do either literary arts programming, or it was primarily dance and theater. And so there are two M's. It's Muriel Miguel and Mari Mumford. So Mari Mumford, so she was the one that was the founder, and then Alejandro Anserio was the co-founder for dance. And the Indigenous dance program actually fostered a lot of us in this country, like Santi Smith, Tanya Lakeen Linklater, Brandon Oakes from Akwesasne, like so many of them, Sandra Laurent, who then became the director of Indigenous Arts many years later, who runs, she runs, can't think of her company right now. And so in 2016, it became they decided, inspired, to create an all year round, all arts sector department called Indigenous Arts. And they decided to do a call out for the director of Indigenous Arts. So that was in 2016. And at that time, I was on an advisory for developing the Indigenous theater at the National Arts Center. I was one of 4 that were part of the advisory of what would an Indigenous theater look like at the National Arts Center. And then Wanda was at the AGO. And so I knew that this position existed. I knew they wanted to fill it. And then I applied. And I applied because I recognized that if you're going to bring Indigenous artists into these major institutions that we've never been invited into before, you're kind of setting us up to fail. And so what the BAM Center is excellent at is creating processes and developing new works and having residencies. And I went, then I'll apply for this job so that I can create programming that allows Indigenous artists to succeed in these major institutions. And so it became, for me, it was like a triangle, right? It just became, I was one of the many. And I recognized how important that role was. So that was my focus and vision of applying. And I knew I was going to get it, so I got it. And then, but where the problem was with the institution was they didn't tell anybody else that I was there and I needed to use their spaces. So I immediately got hit by other directors going, well, you can't do your visual arts programming because we do our visual arts programming. And I went, well, where do you think we're going to do our visual arts programming at the BAM Center, Indigenous arts, visual arts, if I don't have a place to do programming? So then it just became, and then it was like literary arts was the same thing, like they're like, oh, you need to use the Leighton Studios? I'm like, yes, we do actually. And so it just became, I was like, you put it in my job description, but you didn't put it in anyone else's job description. And no one else was doing across the arts programming. It was only Indigenous arts doing it. And then you start really recognizing that microaggression and direct racism reveal themselves pretty quickly. So there were some directors that were like, let's do it. Whatever you want, I support you. Let's do this together. And the beautiful thing about the center was we had agency and autonomy to do that. I did the programming. I told people what I wanted to do. But when I needed to go into certain spaces and my peers refused to let me in, I went, you're racist. But I never said it because you can't do that because it's not helpful. But it's just like, I just go, okay, so now what my job description is, which is not yours, is to find ways to do my programming without offending you or having you feel like you're onto something good. And that's that emotional labor, that's that spiritual heavy labor, it's all it's intellectual labor, it's all labor that we don't get paid for. And so I think that was like the big challenging thing. So they wanted to do it, they instilled it, they hired me, and then the institution wasn't ready to receive. And I think that's a huge gap, and I think that gap still needs to be fixed. And also, like I heard someone mentioning earlier, you're the one person. So there was me, and then I was able to have an associate, so I hired an associate, and I had a program manager. And then there was Indigenous leadership that had the same system structure, which is how they built my system. When I left, I let the associate director know, listen, when I leave, they're going to offer you this position because they're not going to recruit because they're lazy. Not because you're not, she's amazing. I said, but I guarantee you, if you take the job, they're not going to give you an associate director. And that means you're going to take on that labor. And they took all the program managers and report them to one person outside of the areas. So you're going to have you. So that's your choice. And it was terrible to predict that and be correct. So she's now the director. She has no associate director and no program manager. And so they stepped back. And this is, I think, the trend of you want to do it, you have to do it, you do it, and then you're scared and you retract. And that's what COVID did. COVID retracted a lot of TRC advancement in that way. And so but the programming still exists. And so the artists are still there. And the beautiful thing about BAM Center is when you're an artist, you don't see any of that internal drama. But when you work there, it's terrible. Yeah. And now that I've worked there, I can work anywhere.
We're talking into this issue of what we've learned within this issue of working forward. Can you speak a little bit about what you've learned, gained, knowledge, experiences within these experiences of transforming, of invading, of doing all the work that you talked about before, trying to change a place?
I've learned that it's hard. It's a lot of work. But I think it's essential. It's very important work, but it is very, it can be very exhausting. But I've learned that when we're many, when we have support from our peers, from our fellow Inuit, we are empowered and we take the spaces that we need to take within our institutions. Because I work, maybe I forgot to mention, but Avingaq is an Inuit organization, but I think the fact that we are so far from the people we're serving, that's where the transformation needs to be. And yeah, it's a challenge. And I'm only recently feeling comfortable in this role of leadership inside my own institution, because I think it took me 5 years to really understand what an institution is, or understanding all these different systems, all these different organizations. Yeah.
All the structures that
All the
Reneltta is also talking
yes,
about,
exactly. And I'm still sometimes very confused, but yeah, still learning.
What do you do to make that, like, how do you react when you become confused or when you don't know where to go? What's your structure, or what's your plan, or what's your way to cope with that?
I'm starting to like really ask questions, and also not put myself in where I'm the only Inuk. So I've been that only Inuk in some spaces, and that's really not ideal. And when we are many, that's when we feel strong and comfortable to speak up. Yeah.
Dine, you've been doing the other kind of work. You've developed an institution which is indigenous in the core. What has that process done to you? Or what do you think when you hear about these other issues that the other institutions, how do you navigate that balance? Because you do a lot of interventions in other institutions, right? You use your powers within your network, your organization to infiltrate.
Sounds like I'm doing something else. Oh my God, yeah, what I feel like very honored to listen to how you have been going through, because I can't even imagine like being on my own, like going into this big institution, like demanding this space, but using like having the artist voices, artist production, artists is much easier for me. Like, of course, it's quite alone in the institution, working in the administrative, trying to make changes. But I use kind of forces like we always have been doing. That's the core of it. Like using each other, using fields, using. For me, it's more. I call you kind of. But that's the thing about the circumpolar. That also might be the answer for this, because, as I also said earlier, we are not the only one who has done this. We have ancestors who's actually done this. My parents, my grandparents, who were artists, like our artists, like Arnannguaq, all the artists. We haven't done anything yet, kind of. We actually just, for me, it's very important to follow the history, looking back to the history, but also like trying to figure out what's been done wrong, and how can we change this in this situation. And often, yeah, it's hard because we can't do the transformation, because also, like we said, it's not everything who has to be transformed. It's not everywhere we have to have this space. And it's kind of like, yeah, I think you have to choose your battles in this kind of situation. But remember always, you're not the only one, you're not the first. You have your like, and you have to look back to look forward. And then you also have to think about the future, really have to think about the future. In my occasion, we do projects. And now this project, we actually just got funded. It's going to be this change, because the change is that we need. I'm not sure, because I have been questioning myself about the curator, like curator in a very Western set way. We always using the word curator.
Curator.
Yeah. Curator. And for me, it's like, it's very set thing. I think we have to discuss, like, is indigenous curators the same as the... Is it the same? Because it's very sad, and often when I meet, like, white curators, it's very sad, and the educational is very sad, kind of. The opposite how we work as curator. We do a lot of things with not that kind of curator. So for me, it's very questionable. Like,
I'm doing this with the university. We have a Sami university, so I'm trying to bring up this course where I really want to discuss this and making a course, so we don't like doing this by ourselves in the future. That we secure our future artists, curators, and stuff like. So we have to begin where it's all got lost. It's in academia, so we have to challenge this and trying to use all our forces to think about the future, because in the colonization we still are so colonized and we still are so few working on this again. So we have to think about the future. That's the change, that's the transformation we can do. So in this project I do, it's called Survival Through Art, Birgiupme. It's a Sami language that is a bit of its own. We have it in Garashlitnunat too. So surviving, and that's how we have been doing, and we still do. We survive. We're trying to survive. So the biggest transformation is to actually challenge where it's all like got changed.
You're all acknowledging the fact that we're just on the shoulders of somebody else, working in some kind of relation. But I also feel like when we talk about transformation, we tend to think it goes the right way all the time. But you also speak into this fact that we're going backwards sometimes. And we have to acknowledge the fact that transformation is not all the time going in the right direction. Sometimes we fail, sometimes the institutions fail. Sometimes, and I really like the fact that you've been acknowledging the 70s movement in Greenland and how powerful the art movement was in the 70s, demanding change, demanding political revolutions, and actually gaining power in together, creating new structures. And since then, the movements have not been that strong. So this way of actually acknowledging the fact that movements are not necessarily going in the right direction or gaining pace, we will experience backlashes. We will be disappointed within our institutions or within the structures that we work in, but still trying to navigate this, and sometimes it demands us moving from the institutions, right? Sometimes it demands, right now I'm not making the change that I want where I am, so I will remove myself from it where there is more people more friends to gain or more people to call or yeah. Do you recognize that? Yeah. But we have 20 minutes and we are like, it goes too fast. We have 20 minutes, and I want to open a little bit to questions as well. So, because we can easily talk for an hour or more. But if there is any questions, I want to open up for questions as well. Yeah? I'll pass on the mic here.
Thank you. I'm really interested in this topic because when I worked at Avingaq 12 years ago, the collection was not accessible even to employees. And in my experience, the art world and the milieu of like artifacts and history is a very closed and abstract concept to the people who are there. And like, I can't remember who was saying, but it's all according to their education, and they have very specific tasks and roles. But then indigenous people come in, and honestly, I see all of you as kind of the first line of defense in a sense that most of the artifacts or artworks that are in the South were basically pillaged or stolen, even to the point of human remains or grave robbing. And these things were treated as artifacts, as objects, as history, and not connecting them to the communities that we are as a colonial instrument, erasure. And so to be able to go into these spaces and go be alone, and take on the burden for all of us and be there for our ancestors and our belongings, is a really big thing to ask of indigenous people, but it's a necessary move that we have to make. So my question is, as your community, as Inuit, what can we do that will make you feel supported and not alone in that.
It's a really beautiful question. Thank you. That was for the museum curators.
Yeah, so if you've ever been in a museum vault, and I was like in one, and not to like name institutional names, so I won't, but it was recent, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in the belly of a soul eater. Like, it's just like full of, because I was working with New Channel elder who said, he's like, oh, some of these institutions, you know, they took our whole worlds. Right? They took everything. And I remember encountering a drum that came from my dad's region that hadn't been out of its box in probably 30 years, and it was a good 100 years old. And it's a drum, right? So it's meant to be like loved and handled and touched. And I remember they let me touch it, and I cried immediately. Because it's a good point. Like this is, and it's also to Reneltta, what you were saying, like I always call what you were describing earlier the secret second job description, where sometimes it's secret, sometimes it's not, because some things are in your contract and sometimes they're just implicit. You're expected, like even if your contract, nuts and bolts, is very similar to another curator on your team, there's still this implicit expectation that you are going to be the cultural consultant and guide for all things. And especially too, like that's hard when you're working in an Inuit capacity, and it's harder too where I work in such a broad pan-Indigenous capacity, and I've thought about this a lot, where it's just like, well, what is my time limit here? I used to think about that in terms of like, how long can I sustain being in an institution? Because that's also a real question, but also it's just like, how do I make sure that I don't get incumbent? So maybe someone who comes from the plains or who comes from Northwest Territories or comes from the Northwest Coast can come in, because we're gonna need a prism of eyes on this, right? It can't just be me for too long, because I can't know everything. I can't hold everything. But I think in terms of like support and not feeling alone, I think like you're all doing it right now. You showed up to this room, right? I wouldn't be able to do this job without the network of both other institutional curators, because it is nice to sit and commiserate with someone that knows so intimately what it's like to be in a belly of a soul eater. But then also to just, it's for me, it's always about having someone to affirm you in a way, because especially like right now, being the only Inuk and the only Indigenous person on my team, which I said is about to change. And I have a great team. I love my team. Wonderful people to work with. They've opened doors for me. They have been kind to me. They've been wonderful collaborators. But still, there's things that like we had an issue for a while when I showed up, because we have something called like an education handling collection, which we no longer have because I complained, which was masks from the Northwest Coast, up and down the Northwest Coast, that had been like up from Northwest Coast up into Alaska, that had been taken really kind of, I think, during the potlatch ban. A lot of the masks came in during the potlatch ban, which is a problem in itself. But then these were the ones that were deemed by the founder to be not of like exemplary aesthetic quality, so they were given to school children to handle and pass around. I know. And then, so, you know, having discussions like that, and this has been happening for a long time. They were also not like in a very dignified like storage capacity. But then coming in as an Indigenous curator and being like, oh my God, like, why are these here? Why are these being handled by school kids? And everybody else. And then like, as soon as you like talk to like being safe to talk to someone from outside the institution who's like, yeah, that's bananas. Like, you're not crazy. Because it's just like, how has this been allowed to go on for so long? Like maybe I'm just making too big of a deal of this, right? So I think, yeah, just having collaborators like and networks all over, and showing up for your friends that are like in the trenches, like just as I will show up for you if you're in the trenches, right? That's yeah, we all got to do this work together, and it's long work.
I think the same, that I feel that my community shows up, and we have a community. That's something I really cherish. And also, I don't think that when working with my people, with my community, that's not where it's exhausting or where it's hard. So it actually gives strength. So, yeah.
But you're constantly challenged in in your, what do you call it? Ethical way you're working with your things. You're constantly challenged within working within the vaults, working within your institution. So this question about how you navigate that and how we can support each other is also I think one of the answers is also that we have to call each other. We have to connect to be able to get our navigation skills back on track, because we're constantly being thrown off the line, questioning ourselves, questioning the decisions that we make. So we need each other from different areas to be able to say, hey, I'm in this situation. I don't know what to do about this. In your case with the mask, like, is this just me or is this crazy? Yeah. And then then we can tell you that's really crazy, and then you can be empowered and go on with it, right? But we need that way of, because we can easily question each other, being isolated. I think somebody said yesterday that the scariest thing for all the white institutions is the gathering of all of our Inuit forces, because we have so much power together, we have so much force together. And that's what we're doing on this conference, right? Gathering our forces. And I really feel like that's a powerful move to gather here and be able to help each other on issues like that.
The other kind of, just to reflect on community, is that that we're always asked to be experts, but we're actually not experts because we're so new to these spaces, and so we're bringing the knowledge that we have in the moment, or have access to in the moment, and our stories are transformational, right? And so it's like, so what I love and what I value is, like, sometimes, like, I do theater, which means my community doesn't see anything that I do, but they love it. And so that in itself makes me so very happy, is knowing that they read about me in the paper or they see something and they're like, oh, good job, my girl. And I'm like, you don't know, but thank you. But I do bring theater into the community, and they come and they see it, and that makes me feel very grateful. And then the other is that contemporary artistic practice is also new in a lot of these communities, or like, for me, because it's theater. But we have storytelling, so I always say, well, all storytelling is all theater is dramatic storytelling. And so I'm, again, just like trying to build that connection. But knowing, I think there's two things that happen, is that I think sometimes the community wants to come along with you, and so being able to create those conversations, or those like ways to engage where they can come with you in your artistic knowing and learning, and then able to bring that back to them. It's really not visual arts that I'm talking about, because visual arts is very much in community, and when it comes to like institutions and stuff, just kind of finding ways that when they do come to visit, that we allow them, like, that we create a space for them to like be a part of that. And I always think about how communities call you back when they need you to come back, and what a gift that is. And so I always think it's very like a wave of a back and forth that I really value.
But I think there is an interesting balance in that whatever the community needs and what they respond to. In Kalaallisut, the museum, the name for a museum is Katsasugaasivik, a place where we gather things. It's a storage space. And it's like, it's always been mind-blowing to me. And the expectations from the public is, you take care of it. And I don't need to see it. I don't need to come. I know you're doing a good job. You're taking care of it for us. and that different expectations within the community and outside in the communities in other institutions, what the expectations is for us to actually activate the things that are in a storage space or in the belly of a soul eater. Yeah. We have time for one last question, I think. You want to be the last?
Chinan Sagu, so much for all of your words. It's very empowering. I thought it was interesting when you said something about how Indigenous curation different than just curation. And I wanted to ask you guys kind of a specific question, something that I've done in my independent and employee like curatory roles is like ask for like for them to have cultural committees, like to be hired on as consultants with me. Do you guys have any of that? Because I feel like in some ways when you're working as the only one, oftentimes like you have to be calling your aunties and your uncles and your grandmas to get support, right? And then you have to bring it into the institution and say, well, they also support me in these things. Have you guys had any sort of like practical strategies within your institutions to pay for that labor, to bring that labor with you and to get it recognized? I'm from America, so we don't have recognition of like culture bearers on like an academic level. But I just was wondering if you guys had any other strategies that you've employed in that.
Very good question, because this is like in this small community we represent, because like where Gaudagaino is 3,000 peers living in Gaudagaino, and in indigenous way we always been like talking about the issues within the family, but in the institution we have been, because I represent interdisciplinary artist collective, so I have to have some part of partnership with. And the artist within this work, we always have an artist who actually is paid for to represent this, because we can't do this by ourselves at all. So, and you have to pay for this knowledge, and that's the knowledge, and also we have to work upon, because the knowledge sharing has been for free too long. It's and the knowledge we often give is a giveaway to the opposite part, It's the Western who just drain us for the knowledge, And so it's very important to have this. So what I have been making in our institution, it's actually products. We have been products for institution to regain our knowledge, So it has become a paid knowledge. So I never give away my artist knowledge to the institution. So I always go in the front, and then I do this talk, and then if you give us this kind of money for this kind of, and then also we have to professionalize our artists to meet this kind of requests. So always having in a disciplinary, always having partners, so always not standing alone. That's how we also can work within, because it's not often resources come like this. We need time, so always secure that is always getting money for this knowledge. And we have to do this in a practical way, because also that's why it's important to talk about the curation from the Western perspective to our perspectives, if it makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And we're a really strong resource. We have to acknowledge the fact that we are a resource, and people need to pay us for that knowledge that we come with, whether and whoever we consult along the way. But I think there is both you and I have a quite strong, I think Heather said it yesterday, no bullshit filter. Yeah. And I've inherited some of it from Dine as well. This thing about saying no. Sorry. I really like your project. I really want you to have more indigenous art within your collection. We are a small institution. I cannot support you with the work without pay. But if you pay us this amount, we can be consultants within your project, and we will make sure that those money will go to the right people, and that will support whatever we work with, and that would be a really nice collaboration. and ensuring that not being alone, right? Because that's one of the issues that we've been talking about also. Ensuring that you're not engaging in this project on your own, but engaging in the project saying like, this is me, but I need other people around me for me to be able to think in the right direction. And I think we are too easily, or we have been, I think there is a change coming, but we have been too easy to persuade. To be like, we've been like, oh, thank you so much for including Inuit perspectives or for including indigenous perspectives. So thankful that you want to do a small exhibition in your corner, maybe including one Inuit artist. But that, like, no. And I think, again, getting back to this, us coming together on a conference like this, is also strengthening our no bullshit filter. Maybe that's a drop mic. Like, it's 12:00, and it's lunchtime. So thank you so much for coming and joining, and for the conversations. And please engage with these brilliant people doing lunchtime as well. Thank you so much.